Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tearing into a massive milestone, the world's first comprehensive AI law, known as the EU AI Act. For those of you looking to cut through the noise and genuinely understand the nuts and bolts of this landmark legislation, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to use a clear, logical structure to unpack exactly how the European Union is trying to bring some order to the Wild West of artificial intelligence.
It's kind of the ultimate puzzle of our century, right? How do you actually regulate a technology that's moving, well, way faster than the law itself? That is the massive challenge the EU set out to solve when they first launched an ambitious digital strategy proposal way back in April of 2021. They knew they needed a framework that wouldn't just become obsolete the second the next big tech breakthrough dropped. They needed something dynamic.
So here's our roadmap for This Explainer. First, we'll look at the foundation of the first AI law. Then we'll explore how they're categorizing AI by risk. Third, we'll dive into the banned and high-risk systems. Fourth, we'll tackle rules for generative AI and transparency. Fifth, we'll see how this actually encourages European tech innovation. And finally, we'll break down the exact compliance timeline. Let's get right into it. All right, Section 1. The first AI law, origins and priorities.
From day one, the European Parliament had a really clear checklist. They wanted to make absolutely sure any AI used inside the EU checks these specific boxes. It's got to be safe, transparent, traceable, non-discriminatory, and environmentally friendly. I want to highlight that word traceable for a second. You know how AI can sometimes act like a total black box? Well, knowing exactly how an algorithm got from point A to point B is absolutely crucial here. But honestly, the biggest priority is that last one, overseen by humans. The EU intentionally kept this tech neutral to guarantee that automation never ever replaces human judgment. Basically, a real, live person always has to be the ultimate failsafe.
Moving right along to Section 2, categorizing AI by risk, or what we'll call the risk pyramid. So rather than just slapping a giant one-size-fits-all rule on every single piece of software, the EU went with a risk-based classification system. It's basically a traffic light setup. Higher risk, stricter rules. Minimal risk, just a basic assessment. For instance, a simple AI spam filter, or the algorithm suggesting your next favorite song, sits way down at the bottom in the minimal risk category. There's literally zero threat to your fundamental rights there. But as we move up that pyramid to AI making decisions about, say, your medical care or your career, yeah, the regulatory burden goes way, way up. It's all about perfectly matching the strictness of the rule to the actual potential for harm. Which brings us to Section 3, banned and high-risk systems, drawing the line. And this is where the EU draws a massive line in the sand. Anything labeled unacceptable risk is completely banned, period. We're talking about dystopian stuff here, like cognitive behavioral manipulation. Think dangerous voice-activated toys that might subtly trick kids into unsafe behavior. Absolutely banned. They've also outlawed social scoring. You know those algorithms that constantly judge people based on their daily habits or socioeconomic status? Gone. And really crucially, they banned real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces, like mass facial recognition scanning crowds on the street. Now, quick aside, there is a super narrow exception for law enforcement. They can use post-biometric ID, meaning the scanning happens way after the fact, but strictly for prosecuting serious crimes, and even then, only with a judge's sign-off. So we've got a really sharp contrast here. Unacceptable risk systems are just outright banned to protect fundamental rights, full stop, no negotiation. But high-risk systems, that's a totally different ballgame. These are allowed because, well, society actually needs them to function. But since they could seriously mess with safety or civil rights if they glitch out, they have to be strictly assessed before they ever see the light of day. And the EU doesn't just check them once and walk away. These systems have to be constantly monitored throughout their entire lifespan. So what exactly falls into this high-risk bucket in the real world? It's basically split into two halves. First, you have products. This means toys, cars, medical devices, elevators, aviation. Because a bug in these could literally result in physical injury, any AI inside them has to comply with strict, pre-existing EU product safety laws. The second half covers high-stakes sectors. We're talking critical infrastructure, law enforcement, employment, and border control. Picture an AI filtering job resumes or deciding who gets pulled aside at passport control. Any AI operating in these sensitive areas has to be officially logged in a dedicated EU database for total accountability. And here's an awesome detail. Regular citizens actually get the right to file formal complaints about these high-risk systems to national authorities if they suspect the AI is acting sketchy or unfairly. Let's pivot to Section 4, generative AI and transparency, rules for everyday AI. Now, this is fascinating and, honestly, probably the most surprising takeaway from the source text. Generative AI, like ChatGPT, will not be classified as high risk. I know, right? Despite all the panic and wild media headlines over the last couple of years, these models actually sit lower on the EU's risk pyramid. For Gen AI, the EU is completely shifting gears away from heavy safety bans and focusing almost entirely on copyright, accountability, and transparency.
So, if these generative models aren't classified as high risk, what are the actual ground rules? There are 3 big ones they have to follow. 1, developers have to clearly disclose when content is AI generated. 2, they've got to design their models so they literally can't generate illegal content. And 3, they must publish detailed summaries of the copyrighted data they use for training. That third one is a huge deal right now. Think about all the visual artists and writers who recently found out their life's work was scraped without permission to train these models. This rule hits the nail right on the head. It makes sure creators get respect and guarantees that the giant datasets feeding these models aren't just locked behind a wall of corporate secrecy.
But hang on, there is a pretty big caveat here. Standard generative AI isn't high risk, sure, but the really high-impact general-purpose models, think the massive foundational systems like GPT-4 or Gemini, they do get an extra layer of rules. Because these things are insanely powerful and could pose a systemic risk to society if they go off the rails, they require way more rigorous evaluations. Plus, if any serious incidents or flaws pop up in these high-impact models, developers are legally mandated to report them straight to the European Commission. And for us everyday consumers, there's a vitally important rule about deepfakes. If you generate or heavily modify an image, a piece of audio, or a video using AI, it must be unmistakably labeled, no exceptions. This is a direct measure aimed at shielding the public from malicious misinformation. In a world where a fake AI audio clip could literally swing an election or trash a stock price overnight, this transparency requirement is absolutely crucial for our daily media diet. Okay, moving to Section 5, encouraging European tech innovation, supporting startups. So the EU isn't just trying to play bad cop here. They actively want to support their startups and small to medium businesses. A lot of people worry that heavy regulation just crushes the little guy while massive tech monopolies easily brush off the legal fees. To stop that from happening, the law actually forces national authorities to set up regulatory sandboxes. Basically, these are safe, real-world testing environments. Small businesses get to develop and run pre-release tests safely without sweating over the immediate threat of massive fines. It's all overseen by a specific Parliament working group and the EU AI office, which gives European startups the exact breathing room they need to invent, test out boundary-pushing ideas, and actually compete globally. Finally, Section 6, the compliance timeline. When do these rules actually apply? Because it's a massive law, this rollout isn't happening all at once. The law was officially adopted in June of 2024. Fast forward to February 2025, and those strict bans on unacceptable risk systems, like social scoring, are already active. 9 months after entry into force, the codes of practice kick in, giving companies a baseline framework to follow. At 12 months, those broad transparency rules for general-purpose AI become non-negotiable. 2 years out, at the 24-month mark, the entire act is fully applicable across the board. And finally, at 36 months, the super complex obligations for those high-risk systems take full effect. The EU is doing this staggered approach on purpose, giving every different sector the exact runway it needs to overhaul its software, hire compliance folks, and get completely up to code. Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, from outright bans and deepfake labels to innovation sandboxes designed to protect startups. The EU has undeniably written the blueprint and set the very first global standard for AI safety. But it leaves us with one massive, lingering question to think about. Will the rest of the world actually follow their lead? Or are we looking at a messy, deeply fragmented future for global tech regulation? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.